You can support In the Past Lane with as little as $1 a month. Just go to the support page at our website, inthepastlane.com. Thanks.
Whoa, hit the brakes. You've arrived at the #1 drive-by for American history. Welcome to The Pit Stop. Brought to you by In the Past Lane, the podcast about history and why it matters. Here's Edward T. O'Donnell, your host and historian at large.
Hi everyone, welcome to The Pit Stop, your Monday source for history on the go in just about 5 minutes. Here's what happened in American history the week of October 7th, 2019. Let's start with birthdays. October 7th, 1879. That's the birthday of labor leader and songwriter Joe Hill, who was born Joel Emanuel Haglund in Gavle, Sweden. Hill emigrated to the United States in 1903 and struggled to make a living as an industrial worker. Eventually, he became active in the burgeoning American labor movement, joining the radical industrial workers of the world. Before long, his chief contribution to the movement was through his skill as a songwriter and performer. He wrote many popular labor songs, including There Is Power in a Union and The Preacher and the Slave. In 1914, Hill was arrested for the murder of 2 men in Salt Lake City, Utah. After a controversial trial, in which the prosecution brought to bear very little evidence, and chose instead to emphasize his radical political beliefs, Hill was convicted. His case drew international attention and calls for clemency and a new trial. But Hill was executed in November 1915. In death, Joe Hill became a legend and a symbol of injustice in a capitalist system. October 8, 1890, World War I flying ace and Medal of Honor winner Eddie Rickenbacker was born in Columbus, Ohio. Eddie Rickenbacker once said, "Courage is doing what you're afraid to do. There can be no courage unless you're scared." October 10, 1917, is the birthday of jazz pianist and composer Thelonious Monk, who was born in Rocky Mount, North Carolina. Monk became renowned as one of the great improvisers in the golden age of jazz in the mid-20th century. His style earned him a lot of criticism, but he didn't care. Thelonious Monk once said, "Don't play what the public wants. You play what you want and let the public pick up on what you're doing." October 11th, 1884, 135 years ago this week, First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt was born in New York City. As the wife of President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, Eleanor Roosevelt redefined what it meant to be First Lady. Whereas her predecessors remained quiet and out of sight, except at major public events, Roosevelt spoke out on social and political issues that she cared about. She also wrote a weekly column on important issues of the day that was printed in hundreds of newspapers across the nation. Roosevelt later served as U.S. delegate to the United Nations. Eleanor Roosevelt once said, "One's philosophy is not best expressed in words. It is expressed in the choices one makes." Okay, what about events? October 8th, 1871, the Great Chicago Fire began. Over the next few days, the conflagration burned most of the city and killed more than 300 people. And no, it was not started by a little old lady named Mrs. O'Leary. That is a complete myth. October 9th, 1635, the Puritan colony of Massachusetts expelled religious dissenter Roger Williams. Williams eventually founded the nearby colony of Rhode Island, which explicitly allowed for religious dissent. His ideas about religious liberty laid the groundwork for the principle of freedom of religion that, 150 years later, would be enshrined in the First Amendment to the Constitution. Roger Williams once said, "Enforced conformity confounds civil and religious liberty and denies the principles of Christianity and civility. No man shall be required to worship or maintain a worship against his will." October 11th, 1984, 35 years ago this week, astronaut Kathleen Sullivan exited the doorway of the Space Shuttle Challenger to become the first woman to walk in space. October 13th, 1892, as part of the commemoration of the 400th anniversary of the arrival of Christopher Columbus in the New World, millions of American schoolchildren recited for the first time something called the Pledge of Allegiance. There's a remarkable backstory to the Pledge of Allegiance, including the fact that it was written by a socialist. If you want to learn the full story, check out In the Past Lane episode number 13. Okay, time for the last word. Let's give it to Joe Hill, who was born 140 years ago this week. Here's an excerpt from one of his labor songs, Workers of the World Awaken. Workers of the world awaken, break your chains, demand your rights. All the wealth you make is taken by exploiting parasites. Shall you kneel in deep submission from your cradle to your grave? Is the height of your ambition to be a good and willing slave? Okay, people, that's your history fix for the week. Now put it in drive and go make your own history.